Hi. Oh, thank you so much for including me in this extravaganza. I have to say, I couldn't yawn at all. I just couldn't yawn. And I think that just strikes right at my sense of the voice. For me has always been a site of tension and a problem. I think a lot of my writing as a poet has emerged in that space that is the problem of the voice, the problem of existing in the world somewhere beyond that interior kind of field of being. So I'm going to read some poems from a few different books, and at a certain point there's a couple of short videos I wanted to share. But I thought I would start particularly after Fidesz's amazing mentoring and example and reference to birthing. This is a poem that goes way back in my practice to about 1992, so before I had my children. And I was still very much kind of gnawing through this kind of problem of mother-daughter communication, of the difficulty of voice, how the mother-daughter relation can be a very contested site. So this references birth, but also that sense in which somehow we gain our voice through the voices of those who've gone before us, and actually through their lack of voice as well. So this is from a longer poem called Words. A long gash, gut deep and then scourging toward fresh oxygen, how she opens her mother's lips and closes them. She is the scourge of the gash disclosing her mama's insides. The deep guts of her mother are what she moves out of, betrays, bringing along this opening. For those moments, another head with a different brain is the concentric consensus, around which her mother's widened lips, for speech and meanings, a seed. She takes the words out of her mother's mouth, her mouth displaced from language, language disemboweled of words, her mother's, which she holds in the gash and involucrum of her wanting, wanting to open her own lips and close them, graceless on gasps of oxygen. No word then for the displaced mothers, reverberating, holler-stretched caw, cussing cornucopia, laugh aloud, collapse, her scourged of. In every mother-daughter narrative, there are two interpretations, a mouth within a mouth, each holding the other partially open and also closed. I am condoning a space between my lips to suggest openness so that we might speak if you also have this desire for partial closure only. This metaphor is a way of holding mouths partially open and also closed, to keep utterance on hold away from rattling, since the rattle in our voices would shake me, and I am trying to hold on. If the opening discloses you to me, my openness in relation to both our partial closures might open, and we could begin to get somewhere. One of the other thoughts I was having about looking back at some of my older work and thinking about voice was the degree to which listening to the natural world puts us into, this immersion of sound. And it's sound that we learn to censor out of our perception very early on. So says Pauline Oliveros when she talks about how babies born into human society essentially are trained to stop listening to the natural world. So here's a poem that somehow thinks about our survival instinct away from death, toward life, and how we sort of birth ourselves through this realm of natural sound. This is also quite old. I think I wrote this in the early 2000s at some point. Squawks and caws of ravens shot through his/her consciousness, and the peeps and squeals of flickers and jays and swallows. An almost deafening pulsation of cricket song necklaced the morning, and he could imagine diving into the crisp water and yanking its cool volumes with his/her hands and pushing his own here streamlined, here burbled bulk forward in viscous, surreal underwater space and time. To hold the breath like milk inside the body and feel the eyeballs swell and sour against the bits of murky flotsam. To count in the head against re-entering the world. To exert a death wish on oneself, even for 12 or 15 seconds. To die below the lake and never reappear. A good dream sometimes, one that might teach infants to jettison life suddenly, imagining floating again in their mother's amniosis where breath was supplied and so just dying. She would crash up to a wave of air again, gasping, wiping the bark bits from his eyelashes, suckling cool wind into his/her chest, smiling. Then heard the child yelp in birth, screech for dear life, and nursed it on one nipple, a sudden siphon, a parent beast smelling of sweat and blood and triumph, and the child's tiny fingers and puckered earlobes still shedding gummy white vernix, and tight, determined gums pumping and crying. I'm going to read a little bit from my new book, which is called Charger. I'm very happy, just got it recently. And it's a book that thinks about voices that are mediated, I guess, through our technology. It's a book that thinks about life force and relations, death and life, how we decide who gets to live, who gets to die. In the era of coronavirus, who gets the ventilator and who doesn't get the ventilator, all of those hierarchies of care. Some of that's in the book. And I'll start by reading from Charger 1. I'll show you, the book looks like this. I'm playing with spatializing the text. So the entire book is written across the gutter and is thinking more in terms of the movement that we have from screen to screen now, how we read across screens very fluidly and fluently, and we attribute voice to all that text that we're reading, and we hear the voices of all of the speakers and beings and people we're watching and listening to and creeping among and witnessing. And so this idea of voice as really the medium of our era, I think is pretty profound. So this one starts with, this idea of social media being a place where we're continually passing information to each other and thinking about why we do that, what we think we're sharing, what our voices are bringing to each other. Passing on information does not make us remember it. Something has to happen inside the organism for memory to occur. For something to occur in memory, the skin is a membrane. For something to touch my insides, I have to involve it in movement. Information moves when it seeps through time and becomes material. Memory occurs in the dwell or the repercussion. Feel free to argue. Feel free to get stuck in, on, over this. Feel free to make a big deal of this. Go ahead and make a mountain of this molehill. Say I never told you, or it went right by in a blur. Say you missed it in the cascade of posts yesterday, about who won all the awards, who should have won them for their better excellence. Tug at my bra strap and say, listen, you're not listening. Pop by in a couple of days, say, oh, my cell died. I forgot my cord and it went past me. I let it go past me, felt it slide over me like a wind made of data. When the wind gathers, it's clearly full of information. Pull some cotton over your body. Imagine it's made of language, which used to go on outside the head, but now swirls from gaze to gaze with a new efficiency. I'm passing you on this message, and don't think it's casual. This is pure steam. This is something else. I think you should read it. And now I'm going to read one of the longer poems in Charger. Most of the poems in the book are actually quite long, but we move through them quite quickly. So one of the challenges in writing this text was to keep it very oral and quotidian, really, and rhythmically, and to try to still, sort of build the metaphorical and the movemental dynamics of the pieces. I'm from Sudbury, and I spend most of my summers in Sudbury, and this was set in Sudbury by the lake. Charger 12. It's like a solar-powered lawnmower arrives to do his duty. Both the guy and the machine operate their powers to puncture what we refer to as nature's score of laps and licks and skirmishes of breeze and Christ, but isn't it agitation? I just wanted a little quiet. Now 3 of them, actually, out of a van, off a trailer, a coordinated chorus of mowers moving over the short green expanses, making them shorter and less green, more uniform, more ground down to echo the contours of the ground itself. And I know it's their summer job, and they're likely students at the college with 2 weeks final pay before fall classes begin, and at the very least, they're footing their own smartphone bills, so instant texting, liking and swiping will continue when their palms are ready to charge again, trying to guzzle upon the shared social all we can eat. And what's so special or natural about quiet, anyhow? Take this wind-scuttled open concept place and set it in some walls. It's all sound, never stillness. If we pay attention to John Cage, if we hear beyond the measure, every body in the room gets to choose an interval that is bearable. Our hands twitch, our arms fold inward, our brain quickens for something more intense or less streamlined. Like a cow with 4 stomachs, we're restless for all the chambers to be filled in with the white juice we both milk and make, drink and emit. It's a choice pre-millennial generations took for all of us, an urge our bodies bristle to bear. So I get when I'm teaching why at break, all my students stay in their seats, wordless and feeding on the slick streams of digital updates, while I sneak a quick look for a red flare alit on the text message icon, because later I want to gorge on your French kisses. And the suspense is killing me with its song-like unisonic pantomime. A set of echoes all the bodies in this chamber can't help but quaver together. Like a dun green field of cows lowing at sundown, moaning for farmers to load the feed at chest level for us, we who are being so disciplined about the interval Gertrude Stein told us was how a sentence actually happens, how a thing knows itself to be filled in enough to be as discernible as a stomach of its own, alongside the multiple other stomachs waiting obediently for the brain spill to arrive, the infill to burst a plenty into radiant data bins we love to believe will be obviously refilled. How they'll be full again of futurity's poetry, of the news, all the new news, smooth chewed by 3 solar-powered mowing machines, now corded up on their iron trailer, drenched in some later descendant sun. A caravan led by one young tanned hand smuggling a cell phone below the rear view mirror, while his second lax hand steers past a lowing herd loose on a field near the emptying college evening class, toward a neon, dusk-brightened, all-beef burger drive-through with Ms. Lauryn Hill on the van radio, like it's still the 20th century. And Georgia, I was thinking here would be a nice place to play the 2-voice clip if we could. Would you be able to put that up? So this is I've been experimenting a little bit with just very DIY video renditions of sort of the energy of Charger. And this is one section that you'll recognize from the text I just read, treated to some digital mediation.
I'm going to read a short section from Charger 12. I'm going to read a short section. Take this wind-scuttled open concept place and set it in. Take this wind-scuttled open concept place and set it in some walls. If we pay attention to John Page, never still beyond. If we pay attention to every body in the room, we hear.
Oh. We lost the sound.
We're restless for all the chambers, like a cow with 4 stomachs. We're the white juice for all the chambers to be filled in drink, and with the white juice we will. It's a choice. Premillennial generation took for all of us. It's a choice. Our premillennial generations took for all of us. An urge our bodies. I'm going to read a short section from Charger 12.
Thanks, Georgia. I think the middle section, the sound dropped out, but that's okay because somehow, incidentally, we ended up with an interval of silence in the middle of this piece. So I kind of like that. I like all those abrasions and erosions and the way that media transfer leaves its touch on our files, and you know, our bodies in a way make their mark through the technology we create. So that's from Charger. It's really fun to read from that. I haven't actually launched it yet because I'm one of those authors who had a spring book, received it a few weeks ago, and all of the situated launches are all canceled. Many writers I know are in this situation, so it's very nice to share it. And I just want to really thank you, Georgia, for this context. So there was one other thing I thought I would share, but you looked like you were going to say something. Did you want to say something?
Oh no, I was just going to say thank you, and then I realized that you were just leading into something else. So
she wasn't stopping. Well, since I couldn't yawn, I'm just going to read. I just wanted to share a little bit about this other project I'm doing because it is kind of very sonically focused. It's a constrained language writing project. It's called Evenness, Unevenness, Evanescences. And you can see from those 3 words that there's something particular going on with the choice of letters. There are no ascenders or descenders. And the constraint that applies to the entire manuscript is using language that essentially has the vowels and then a very small range of the consonants that fit in the X height. So what that does is it creates a very strong visual identity, a very highly ruled text that's kind of interesting, and then it also creates a very strong sonic identity to all of the text. And I go through, there are 3 sections. Evenness sort of speaks to the pastoral and things being in some kind of equilibrium. unevenness moves more into a kind of sense of the enormous disequilibrium of all of our political, social, and every other kind of structure. And Evanescences aspires to some kind of rising toward, you know, this idea of liberation from this horrific high capitalist nightmare to something else. And maybe coronavirus, as you can tell, fits beautifully into the constraint. So there are already a section of poems in the manuscript about coronavirus, care, concern, scans, all that vocabulary. But I'm going to read, I think I'm just going to read one piece. I'm going to read a piece from the unevenness section, and it's called Irises in Vacuo. Sure, a core essence is awesome in wee ounces or Vesuvian coronae, as sworn on or worn in as mica in an acorn cavern, mauve as irises in vacuo, we crane near IMAX senescence, in a CNN cinema as wan as saran over rime ice, or vermin on simmer in a sarin sauce. Our naive snowman manners ensconce mercenaries in zircon visors as uneven inconveniences. A raw sienna erasure, no more an unanimous mosaic. We mince unison voices. We mince unison voices as we sever a common cause. We ease a ruinous noose on successive newcomers, even as our unsane cervixes are riven in recessive censure. A sonic morass, as nacreous as no more noon, sears us. We murmur a moan aurora, scream, roar, snore, or sneeze in rain arcs of sore sun noise, even as our noons are scarce neon in iron unwiseness. Our main issue is sown variance, non-uniform savoriness, uxorious venom, our sumarious noses in warm air. So that's just a little taste of that manuscript. One of the things that I do through a good chunk of it is I use newspaper articles and I just do scans on them, extracting discursive language from the articles so that each of the poems ends up being this very sort of weird, staccato, abstract kind of field of language, but we can instantly identify, you know, many of the sort of social and political relations that are represented in the text. So it's been really, really interesting. And, you know, in terms of voice, I've always been interested in weird voices, in eccentric voices, queer voices, and voices that push against meaning and that kind of make us grapple in that way that I love with, you know, there's something untranslatable. Whitman said it. Many have said it, but that sense in which our voice is an effort. It's never complete or entirely, you know, successful. So then the last thing was possibly to play the other video, which is another kind of very, very noisy, sort of scratchy video that has 3 voices, and it's a translation of a poem I wrote that's called Meditation. And the meditation itself is a very simple sort of spooling of the sort of declaration that the heart breaks and breathes, that the earth also breaks and breathes, hears and breaks and breathes. So it's a very meditative and unspooling kind of text. And again, I tried a rendition using this technology, and we'll see if you can you can hear it. It's about 2 minutes long, and it is a bit aggravating, but also it's kind of like a contemporary meditation, I guess.
Aggravating meditation.
Meditation. The heart breaks and breathes, breaks and then breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. The earth hears and breaks, breaks and breathes. Hears and then breaks and then breathes. The earth hears the heart, how the earth's heart breathes. The heart breaks and breathes, breaks and then breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. The earth hears, breaks, breaks and breathes. The earth hears and then breaks and then breathes and then breathes. The earth hears the heart, how the earth's heart, the heart breaks and breathes. The heart breaks and breaks and breathes. The earth hears the heart breaks, hears and then breathes. The earth hears and breaks. The earth hears the heart and breathes. How the earth hears and then breaks, breaks and breathes. The earth hears the heart, the earth's heart, the heart breaks, the heart breaks, breaks and breathes. The earth hears the heart breaks, hears and then breaks. The earth hears and breaks. The earth hears the heart breaks, how the earth's heart breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. The earth hears the heart breaks, the earth's heart, the heart hears and the heart breaks and breaks. Hears the earth hears the heart hears and then breaks and then breaks. The earth hears the heart, how the earth's heart breaks. The heart breaks and breathes.
The heart breaks and breathes. The heart breaks and then breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. The earth breathes and breaks. The earth hears, breaks and breathes.
The earth hears how the earth's heart breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. Breaks and breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. The earth hears and breaks. Breaks and then breathes. Hears and then breaks and then breathes. The earth hears the heart, how the earth's heart breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. Breaks and then breathes. The heart breaks and breathes. The earth hears and breaks. Breaks and breathes. The earth hears and then breaks and then breathes.
Thanks for playing that, Georgia. Thank you so much. That was a real honor and pleasure to share some work with this particular group across all the disciplines that are represented. I'm very touched to be here.
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, that was wonderful, and I think a really good sequence for us to experience. Like, it's amazing that you found it challenging to yawn. I also have had that challenge a lot. Learn where I can sort of like push and squeeze what's going to come out, and getting there sometimes is tough. And sometimes getting to poetry is tough, but I've always found a really clear connection in the way that you, I want to say manipulate words, but it's not that. I'm not the poet, I guess.
What was the term? Pandiculate? I think I think I pandiculate words, maybe. That's probably not the word fit us, but it's close.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beautifully on time again. So I'm just gonna.
Great, yay.
And I think, is there a way people can just track your work if they're interested or find more?
Oh, sure. Well, right now, my publisher of Charger is Talon Books, Talon Books, Talon Books. So you can find me there, and that will lead you in other directions.